Hello again and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer and also a director now, George James, and I'm also the host and producer of this podcast. And today I've got two of my colleagues with me, Jayne Green and Christian Walter. But before we start, I do need to apologise to you, dear listener. We're a little bit late putting this episode out. We try and stick to an every 2 weeks cadence with the podcast. But to be really honest, we're all super flat out with training. So, guys, I know you've both been really busy. How have things been for you, Jayne, over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it has been hectic. I've been driving up and down the country, delivering training, which is actually great, isn't
Absolutely,
it? So it's doing what we love doing and the purpose of why we're here.
Yeah, we should say, well, we're not complaining, by the way. How about you, Christian? I know you've been super busy as well.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, between delivering training and planning the next one and putting proposals together for maybe less common stuff. I've been very, very busy, but I love it. It keeps me on my toes.
It makes the days go quick, doesn't it? Yeah. Same here. I've been to California. I've been to Tewkesbury, which is less glamorous but equally nice. Up in Macclesfield and all over the place. And of course, we've got a bit of a catch up as well, Jayne, next week with our colleague Prue on a developing our new sort of content, but more of that to come in the future. So what are we going to look at today? So we're going to look at what we call F.A.B selling, F.A.B selling. Now, selling is always fab in my opinion. Now, you guys are much younger than me, but if you have ever watched any children's TV when you were growing up, you might remember Thunderbirds. Anybody remember Thunderbirds? You're too young to remember Thunderbirds, I know. But one of the catchphrases when they were on their way to some disaster somewhere, then they wanted to respond back to base, it was always F.A.B. So we're not going to talk about Thunderbirds today. We're going to talk about features, advantages. My colleagues look at me like I'm gone mad here. Possibly I have.
No, I'm with it. I remember it. My kids used to love this and they had costumes to go with it, but we're not going to go there.
I didn't have to say, yeah. You can never see the strings, though, on those black and white tellies we used to watch it on, could you? But still. It's on YouTube if you really want to watch Thunderbirds, but I'm not quite that sad. Anyway, let's move on. What do we mean by F.A.B selling? It's features, advantages, benefits. In other words, how do we now move our product stuff into something that's of real value? I'm going to use that word a lot today, and real value to our customers. So I'm going to start with feature because it's the easy one. So when we talk about a feature of a product, I guess what we're talking about really is its specification or, a particular widget on the product or a particular design aspect or, the display or its, fast auto sampler or something like that. But that's a feature. And one of the things I learned very early on in selling is that we don't sell features, we sell advantages and benefits. So, Christian, I know you've got a great example that we could use here just to position features, advantages, benefits that isn't sort of scientific instrument specific, so perhaps we can all kind of relate to it. So do you want to just explain what you were going through with us before we started recording? Because I think it's a great.
Sure. So I'm a keen ornithologist and bird photographer. I dabble. I'm not a professional by a long shot, but I just take great pleasure from being out in nature. And on the modern cameras, there's a feature called pre-burst. Okay. And pre-burst actually takes pictures before you press the shutter. And that's a feature that's quite popular with bird photographers. Because, of course, the advantage of the pre-burst system is that you might capture a very special moment, such as a parent bird feeding a little bird or a bird taking off for flight or two birds mating or something like that.
Sure.
Which you otherwise miss because when it happens, you have a delayed time until you press the shutter. So that's the advantage. The feature is the pre-burst mode.
Like a second before you actually press the shutter, the camera's recording. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yes. The advantage is you capture the special moment.
Sure.
And then, of course, the benefit always has to be felt in your pocket. And if you're a professional bird photographer, you want to sell pictures or you want to win award, you want to win the Bird Photographer of the Year award, and you want to sell to the BBC Wildlife magazine. And to do that, you need to capture that special moment. And so that's the story, pre-burst, special moment, money in your pocket.
So feature, advantage, benefit. It's a great example. I guess, Jayne, so, features are what the product does. The advantage is a general why it's useful, but the benefit is why it's specifically of use to the person you're talking to, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think features are actually what it is more than what it does often.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I think a feature, would have, it's like it's got a clear screen. It's not what it does.
Yeah. True.
So I think it's like what it is, and we can dwell quite heavily on those without understanding actually, what actually the advantage is, and then what is the outcome. So I think it might be Prue, and I might be wrong, but I know she talked about changing it to FAV, like your
Fav.
features, advantage, and your value. And
I
that
love
really
that.
helps me understand when we see benefits. Sometimes I think we get that mixed up, advantages and benefits. What's the real value? Because that's what the benefit is, isn't it? The real value that is, like Christian said, something that's going to hit my pocket, save the company money, help them generate more profit, maybe help them or that person bring a publication that they didn't realize, a product to market really quickly.
Sure.
These are really good value, saving great money, saving time. Time actually normally equates saving money.
I think that's great, and I love that. If that is you, Prue, well, thank you for the.
If not, I'll take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all George James anyway, but yeah, love it. So I think as technical salespeople, we're comfortable with features. We come from a background where we may have been using the product, whether it's equipment or consumables or whatever. We may have been using it ourselves in the lab or in the factory. And because we like the technology, and I'm guilty as charged there, we like the technology, we're comfortable talking about features. This one goes to 11, full of references today, but you know what I mean? If this one's got a particular feature that that you like, and you think, oh, it's really, really cool, really whizzy. And I think it's difficult then, many salespeople find it difficult to actually relate that to a real person, really, in terms of, putting yourself in the shoes of the lab manager or the factory manager or the process manager or whatever. So how can we get a better handle on what the customer's really looking for rather than what we think the customer wants, Christian? How can we do that?
Yes, I think it's a huge trap we might fall into. We talk about features and we go on and on and on about it, and we don't even know whether those particular features are relevant for this customer because we never translate them into advantages and benefits. And
Absolutely.
I think what we need to do is ask good questions to understand what the customer is looking for. Perhaps the customer is looking for a super high accuracy in order to prove a certain scientific thesis. And then we might actually stress a particular feature, but we have to understand what the benefit is of that feature for this particular customer. Absolutely. And not every customer is looking for the same thing. Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, isn't it? It's to find out what makes the heart sing of this particular customer. Yeah. And then talk about benefits that matter for this particular customer, and then go back to the features, why they deliver those.
So it's asking great questions, Jayne. And I think sometimes as salespeople, we're a little bit reluctant to do so because we think we're a bit nosy or cheeky, but I think sometimes we have to recognize that's what we have to do in sales. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to. And it's the greatest sort of asset that we have if we can be curious. I think if we can then reframe that I'm being nosy, actually I'm being curious. I was talking this week, I don't know about you, but with my children when they were tiny, they asked many what, when, why questions continually, over and over, following me around the house because they're developing so quickly. Actually, as we get older, we sometimes hold back from that. And I think, restoring then that curiosity within ourselves as salespeople or for sale, or particularly newer salespeople, be curious. Don't presume that we know or assume that we know what that person really is looking for. Ask lots of questions.
And if
we're asking mainly scientists, they are generally quite keen to tell us what they're on with, and what they really want. And I think this whole subject is about, customers. We think customer wants to buy a product, and yes, they do. Actually, they want an outcome. And it's understanding what that is. And it's that bit, if we could ask a customer and find a really nice way to frame it with really great open questions. What's in it for you? What do you want to get out of this? What difference is this going to make?
Great questions.
To you. And I think it's just keeping that curiosity level really high.
So
I really
good.
love that, Jayne. And I think, this childlike curiosity, this openness also to the answer, because, many grown-ups ask questions expecting a specific answer. And I think that's a
True.
trap. We need to be open for any answer. We need to
Mm.
ask the question and then listen really well. Sometimes our customers are not so extroverted. They
True.
need a bit of time to think.
Yeah,
And
good point.
if we as salespeople fire too many questions quickly, sometimes the customers don't get enough time to think. So we should be curious and be open and sometimes shut up and listen. And then we find out.
Great points. I think as inexperienced salespeople, sometimes we feel we have to keep the conversation going. We have to keep filling the gap of any sort of silence in the conversation, really. And I think it's an easy trap to fall into. But as you get more experience, you recognize that actually asking those questions and just giving the customer the space and the time to tell you what's on their mind is so important. You're so right about the kid question, Jayne. My grandson's 2 now, and he's just in that phase where, what are you doing, mommy? Why are you doing it? And that question, I think, is, if I can explore that with both of you, that question that starts with why. It's easier to say, what are you doing here? What kind of throughput do you need? What kind of, resolution are you looking for? What delivery period do you need? Who's going to use the product? Those kind of questions. I say it's easy. We can get used to asking those questions. But I think sometimes we're a bit reluctant, Jayne, to ask that question. Why is that important to you?
Yeah.
Why do you need that? What would happen if we couldn't do that, almost, really?
Yeah.
Do you find that as well?
Yeah, but it's such a lovely follow-on, isn't it, from
It is.
an open question where we've asked them to tell us more about what they're doing and they've given us some understanding. And then for us to be able to, and I think this is part of active listening, that leaning in moment of saying, why is that really important to you? Because when we are prepared to ask that question about that thing that we're talking about that is important to them, and we delve in that a little bit deeper, and we're prepared to listen, that's when we find out the real value moments, probably what their value is when we are prepared to ask. I mean, of course, lots of why questions become very annoying, as I realised
Yes, it's
when
not an
one of my
interrogation.
sons was 2. Why? But using why really in a very crafted and careful way is really valuable to find out what the value really is here. That customer saying, what's in it for me? And understanding what that means is really important. And like Christian said, we only get that by asking questions and then being prepared to be quiet
Yeah,
and
super.
listen, very, active listening.
And you make a great point there, what's in it for the customer. And we're talking about the person here, not the
Yes.
organization. It's the person that is buying the product. Yeah, ultimately, it's the company that will write the checkout, but the person that is buying the product or products or whatever it is that we're hoping they're going to buy from us, really. And then that value is what it means, Christian, to that particular person, that individual, isn't it, really?
I think it was. I think if we can find values for the individual and for the different individuals actually that are involved in a sales process, it's always more than one.
Yeah.
And if we can find value for the company, I think then we have the easiest chance of
Yes.
convincing the customer to sign the order. And I'm saying we need to find out what matters to each of the people involved. And it may be different. A lab manager is looking for productivity. A lab technician is maybe looking for easy cleanability because they're fed up and spending too much time cleaning the machines. A scientist is maybe looking for better result quality so we can, publish more relevant data. A procurement person is looking for a return on investment. So I think we really have to find out what matters to each individual.
Super point.
And ideally, we find personal gains and overall company gains.
Yeah, very important.
So how do we do that,
We have to find the right people, and that's the big one, isn't it? We can fall into that trap also of having a very enthusiastic person that might be the end user that we're talking to that is really wowed by, the product that we've got in front of them. And that seems great. And we put all of our eggs in one basket by talking to that person and presume that we might know everything. We have to, I remember many years ago, somebody saying that if you don't have 3 people on your checklist, at least, this is your minimum, then you're possibly not going to win that sale or you're not going to win it very quickly. You're not going to
Great
win it
point.
without losing some profit within there. You know, you need to find all of the people that would be involved, and that takes us to qualification when we are identifying the people that will actually, you know, be involved in making technical decisions and signing off the technical decision, even beyond the end user, possibly. And the people that are dealing with the economic decisions and the commercial decisions, you know, they've all got different important aspects. You know, what is important to them and why is it important?
Yeah,
And
good
we do
point.
the same process. You know, we ask lots of great questions to lots of different people, and we find out the people that can help us direct us to the people that will also be
Absolutely.
part of that process.
And of course, we've covered qualification previously in this
Yes.
podcast, and it's a core part of our fundamental training. But just something that's popped into my mind when you were talking there, and I'd like to explore this with you, Christian. What do you do when the benefit that you would bring to one part of or one person in the organization might be seen as a threat to somebody else? I'm thinking in terms of like when you're selling automation, you know, robotic systems or, you know, any kind of automation that potentially might mean somebody might lose something or even dare I say, you know, not.
Yeah, it's a
have a job
tough one.
afterwards.
It's actually a tough one. I even have some experience of that in my personal
Me too.
life. I was selling to a snack food company in the US. I know actually in the north of England. And it was chloride determination. And they were doing it manually, very cumbersome procedure. We automated everything, including sample transport, sample preparation.
Wow.
And it resulted in the lab staff being reduced significantly. And of course, you know, in that case, it's very difficult to convince the lab techs that this is the right thing. On the other hand, it's also important to not feel too guilty, because I think in the long run, this company wouldn't have survived had they not optimized their analysis procedure in the laboratory. So, you know, sometimes, it cannot always be win-win-win.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you know, if the company goes bankrupt, they don't employ any people anymore, and then everybody's a loser. So sometimes automation has an impact, an immediate impact, but the long-term benefit for the sustainability of the company.
Yeah, it's an interesting example. Yeah, yeah. No names of companies, of course.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Jayne, and so again, listening to what Christian was saying there. So, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, to use the jargon, is need satisfaction selling in many ways, really. And what was clear in that example actually is that people have business needs, but there's also personal needs in making decisions. And I think sometimes we don't really get to understand or we don't try and understand the personal needs too often. I know I've made that mistake in selling. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's important, isn't it, that we do discover that. I think most people, when they're looking at a new piece of equipment, you know, make sure we've got the right person. I mean, so thinking about Christian's example, that was a real example, you know, you wouldn't have been talking to the people that would have been in the lab generally using that. You'd have been speaking to the people that would have been a little further up in that organization that were looking at automation. But it's understanding what that means to them. You know, and actually for some people when they're buying, there's great examples, I think we've probably all got them, of somebody that has been maybe retiring from a department or leaving, and they wanted to get something in, a big purchase in, that was like a legacy that they were leaving. They'd made a great decision, something that was going to transform the work within that lab or in that department. And I remember working with a gentleman many years ago that was pushing so hard to get this piece of equipment in because he wanted to be remembered for that, because it would have transformed, it was going to transform the way that the team were able to work and get faster results. And actually, so for him, there was a personal driver of getting that through, you know, that was actually a little bit emotional for him because he wanted to be remembered for something good when he'd left that company. It was his legacy. How do we identify that within our customers? We ask some really careful questions, once again, some really open questions. You know, what does this mean to the company? And I'd often try and find that if they know, you know, what does it mean, that whole thing? Is there anything in this for you? Is there a, you know, what would be the outcome for you in getting this? Why is this so important now? And then that came out. You know, I think it was probably, I'd like to say that was because of my questioning. I think it was luck.
You're too honest.
I found this out, and then it was like, actually, this guy is the driver. I'm going to make sure I see all of the other people. He got influence. He was going to drive that sale through. And yes, he did.
Quite a lovely example, yeah, and great example of the personal need as well as the business need. There may have been, I'm sure there was a business need for the organisation, but that person had a particular personal goal that you help satisfy, really. So great example. So we've been selling for X number of years between us. For somebody that's quite new into technical sales and try and get their head around features, advantages, benefits, doing this in real time in front of a real customer isn't easy. How can we get better prepared, Christian, for these kind of conversations? What kind of things could we do to get, so we're a bit more pre-warned or pre-armed, if you like, to have these kind of conversations?
So one thing which I would recommend all the companies in our industry to do is when they conduct regular sales trainings to practice features, advantages, benefits with a professional sales trainer and specifically to the instrumentation they are selling. Because people know the feature, all the sales guys know the feature, 40,000 steps resolution, touch screen display, multi-port connection, wonderful software. They all know these features, but we can practice to translate those into various different kinds of advantages and benefits. And I think that's something I believe has to be done on a regular basis. It's in a way a little bit old-fashioned style, but I think old-fashioned is also time tested. And so our sales meetings spend a bit of time, bring somebody in, do it yourself, practice the features, advantages and benefits. And then, of course, the sales guys, when they prepare a sales call, they should also anticipate what benefits this customer could be looking for. Yeah. And you're not always right, but at least you got a rough idea. When you walk into an academic lab, it's probably going to be different than when you walk into a service laboratory or a contract laboratory, because these people have different aims. And so I think it's good to anticipate.
Would you ever have a sort of a list of features down one side of the page, a list of advantages that go with those features, and then some potential benefits that the customer might be interested in? Obviously, you need to find out. Would you go that far, or is that a bit too extreme?
I think you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? So why not? I think actually a lot of the brochures or the marketing material that is released whenever a new piece of equipment, a brand new piece of equipment is very feature heavy. And of course it is. And I think that moment, there's that danger with a brand new piece of equipment. We get super excited. I just go straight back into my selling days, super excited about a new piece of equipment that we want to go out and tell everybody because we've been waiting for that for so long. But I think we just have to press pause and understand, what does that mean? What does that mean then on this brand new piece of equipment? Or I've started in a new company. So if you've started in a new company and you've got some really great piece of equipment with features, ask your team, what does this mean to the customer at the end of the day? I would write those down and I would start to build on those, because the more people you talk to, you will understand, of course, as Christian said, that what is value to one person isn't the value they're looking for in another, even in the same organisation. So start to build up a whole portfolio of what your benefits and values are within.
That's super stuff, Jayne. I fully agree. And it doesn't stop. It's still ongoing. Right now, everybody comes with artificial intelligence features to their instrumentation, to their software, automatic evaluation algorithms, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Yeah, but what's in it for the customer? What does it do?
So what? Yeah. what does that mean?
Exactly.
It's those three words, isn't it? Which means that. Yeah. That's how I was always taught to link a feature to an advantage. Here's a feature which means that.
Yeah.
Those three little words. It was fuzzy logic in my time. I'm showing my age now. It was always, remember fuzzy logic, Christian? Yeah.
I do remember.
I also remember the first time, about new product launches, the first time I saw a balance with the doors that open automatically. And I still remember how I felt that day, the excitement about that. These days it's when cameras are launched, but that's because I'm getting old and do other things. But yeah, great discussions, guys. For somebody listening to this and that wants to get better, apart from obviously coming on one of our training courses, I don't want to make it sound like this is a sales pitch, but for somebody that wants to get better at features, advantage, benefit selling, what would be one recommendation from both of you? Let's start with you, Jayne. What would you say, for an individual now, who's listened to this, a salesperson, wants to get better at at selling benefits rather than selling features? What would be one takeaway from you?
So one thing would be ask the customer, when we're talking to a customer, and maybe we can do some things before this, but talking to the customer, what is really important to them?
Yeah.
What are they really wanting to achieve? What outcome, is ideal for them? And then we start to capture value and benefits. And then we possibly need to work out whether our machine or our instrumentation can match up to those. But we will often find that by speaking to customers very readily and understanding what their needs are. Even if we're just having a general conversation, we've all got kind customers, and we've all had kind customers that will sit down and have a coffee, explore with somebody that you trust, and it could be somebody in your organisation, but explore with a customer. What benefits would you be looking for, or have you looked for when you bought in the past?
What would you like to do better?
Yes.
What would you like to? I think, one of the things people get told sometimes in selling is to ask about problems. I've never been a fan about that. People don't like to, we're not psychologists. Tell me about your problems. It's people don't like often admitting about problems, but
solutions or
solutions.
Outcomes.
Yeah.
What outcome? What would be
if
the
you had a magic
outcome?
wand, what would you like to improve? Things like that,
Yes.
what keeps you awake at night, or those kind of questions, really.
Yeah.
What from you, Christian? One takeaway from anybody wants to get better at benefit selling?
I think learn from each other, ask your peers, discuss sales calls with each other, and share stories. Also this, I think it's natural, we share the war stories, but then we understand a little bit what made us win this case. And I think the more we do that, the better we can become.
Or lose, for that matter, because I think you lose from
of course,
sales as well.
So true.
Yeah, I remember a conversation when I took over a Salesforce a long time ago, and one of the first things I told them when I looked at the numbers was they didn't lose enough sales, and they thought I was crazy. But what I meant was they were just living within their existing customer base and not asking, not trying to break into new accounts. But that's another podcast for another day. So, Christian, Jayne, thank you very much for your thoughts on features, advantages, benefits. It is a core part of our training material that we deliver, both as scheduled training and also our tailored training as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, dear listener, don't forget to leave us a review. You can leave a review on Apple, but also now on Spotify, and also leave a star rating. 5 stars will be lovely. Thank you very much indeed if you can do so. Don't forget to subscribe to the show as well, so it makes sure the podcast will come into your inbox on a regular basis. We will be having a break in August, so we're going to record 2 more shows to take us into July. Then we're going to have a bit of a break in August because people go on holiday, including you, I'm sure, the listener. So we're going to have a little regroup over August, and then we'll be back in September with more episodes of The Luxury of Choice. Until then, happy selling, and we'll talk to you soon.